Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for another great seminar. How many of you all were here at the very first GIS seminar here at Mount Vernon? Okay, not too many. So, okay, 'cause I'm going to repeat myself a little bit. I did present at that. I've taken my work forward a little bit, and here I am back again. And I'm going to take every opportunity I can to try to use my new word of the day, tortuosity. Thank you, sir. I don't think I'm going to be able to, but I want everybody to clap loudly if I even come close to a proper usage of tortuosity in my talk. Let's see. How am I going to go forward on this thing? I need a little forward button. There it is. In the beginning, there were building permits issued by the city government. This is the beginning of my story today anyway. Issued by the city government, such as it was in Washington, D.C. All my work takes place in Washington, D.C. If you want to build a building, you get a building permit. And this is an archived building permit filmed right off of the microfilm machine at the Washingtoniana division of the MLK Library, where I do a lot of work. So about 15 years ago, I take my background in data and oddly enough end up doing some local history because I'm a greedy, money-grubbing so I've gone into local history for the money. So I'm giving tours, I'm writing about neighborhoods, and I'm very interested in place, the sense of place, and what makes a place what it is. And we have this great archive that really tells you about the buildings. In an urban area, what makes a place what it is, mostly the buildings. People come and go day in, day out, generation after generation, but the buildings more or less are there. So I'm very interested in these. And little did I know that this archive is fairly unique to Washington, so I was doing something that was kind of different, not just in Washington, but in a bigger scale as well. I was really kind of ignorant about all that. All I knew was data. That wasn't data because information has to become data. So I made a database and I started typing and scrolling through microfilm. And several years later, I had myself a database that looked like this. Well, by then I had come under contract with the DC Historic Preservation Office. You heard from Dave Maloney earlier. So here's a sample grab from my database, a permit there. You might see permit number 1715 there in the middle. That was issued in 1904 for 8 buildings, developer and builder Harry Wardman and his architect. 8 buildings, 19 by 26 2-story brick apartments. So that tells us right away that's one of those, one apartment up, one apartment down. That's what they were doing around 1903, 1904. And then information on each building there. So I have this for the whole city, and while I'm making this database, I'm thinking all these little bits of data, they have a place associated with them, so it could be mapped. So luckily GIS had been invented, so I learned started to make some maps that look a lot like this. Now the map in the middle is of selected developers. Those were the most prolific developers in this case, the Eckington neighborhood, northeast DC. And you wouldn't necessarily expect every building by those handful of developers to cover the whole area, so it's okay to have grayed out buildings that aren't represented from that color ramp. The maps rather that flank that map do need complete coverage, or they just kind of start to look silly with a lot of grayed out buildings. The one on the right is of DC's. Is that still the newest historic district, Kim? No, but a very recent addition to the many historic districts in Washington, D.C. That's Meridian Hill. So that's 16th Street running right up the spine of that map, and Meridian Hill Park down in the lower right. And the purple building footprints are contributing buildings, and so they have that level of protection. The pale yellow footprints, if you can make them out, are non-contributing. And that means an owner might have a little bit more leeway with that property. And obviously, they don't want me to make a map like that for them that has buildings that don't have that one of those characteristics that has to be contributing or non-contributing. Now, that might not include all the outbuildings. For instance, a garage on the alley and back, it might be neither. But all the street-facing, addressed buildings must have that attribute. Over here is a map with a color ramp. The darker ones are older. The lighter ones are newer. So, for instance, in the very middle of that neighborhood, and that is the Parkview neighborhood, Soldiers Home is to the east, Columbia Heights is to the west here. Bunch of big buildings in the middle that represent likely urban renewal from about that time period, 1970-ish. And again, it'll start to look odd if you start to have some gray building footprints here. So at some point my task became, well, Brian, you found these 100,000 or so buildings. Let's get all the buildings so that we can make these maps all over the city. And so I started to use GIS to, well, before I talk about that, let me say this is another sample grab from a product that I can make now that I have all this data on these neighborhoods. I put together some PowerPoints, slideshows on the development of different neighborhoods where I can show development through time, different types of architecture, when were these main landmark buildings built. This is a slide from the development of Tenleytown in northwest DC. And you see that one of the subdivisions from that area shows up in sort of pink-purple down there. So another type of product that I can make now for the Historic Preservation Office. So my task then becomes, let's go get something on all the buildings of Washington, D.C. So I load up building footprints with my building permits data, and then I get to work on all the squares of Washington, D.C. So this is in the Palisades neighborhood. That's MacArthur Boulevard that runs up the left side. And in that amber color ramp, that means I have data for those buildings. So one big building up in the northwest corner, that stands out. So I wonder, what about this building up here? There it's highlighted. I've selected it. And the reason, as best I can tell, that I was asked to continue this survey beyond the initial phase of collecting data from building permits is because I found that using GIS is a very efficient and accurate way to do this type of first pass survey. And I'm not doing the full write-up that an architectural historian would do, where they might go into a building and take some samples of the plaster, look at the nail heads or whatever. I'm sitting at the back of the library or at my desk trying to figure out who built it, when, things like that. And GIS is a great place to collect all the historical resources, have them there, and start to get a feel for the neighborhood and the buildings. So in looking at that building up in the top left, we have digitized the subdivisions of Washington. So right away I can see it's in the Whitehaven subdivision. That might help me find the building permit. That's the first thing I'm going to see if I can do, because it looks like an old building, which it shows up here on this real estate map. So I often have geo-referenced real estate maps available to me. And so that's from 1903. I take a quick look on Google Streetview, or one of the other ways that I can get a look at it. And can't get a real good look at it, but it definitely looks like that could be substantially a 1903 building back there or earlier. So right now, from my desk, rather than going to the library and doing a little bit more, but from my desk, wherever I am, I'm going to mark that as a 1903 building, source it to the based real estate maps, because that's my first look at it in time, and I'm going to flag it to do a little bit more research if I have time at the library. Now I'm going to look at this building down toward the southeast corner, because we have a footprint anomaly there. The purple means that's from the city's 2014 issued building footprints. And it looks like the 1928 building has been wiped out and replaced. So I'm going to look for that in Google Street View, and there it is, and that certainly looks like an all-new building. And up here in the upper left, I put the time on there. If you look at Google Street View, you can look at the different ones through time. So I'm looking at an old bungalow up here in the upper left, and I love this photo because it's got the old hoopty out front, rusting in place. And this photo just tells the story of the last decade or so of this property, doesn't it? I can see that it was there in October 2011. And what's odd is that in the map, in this map, and you can see it in that building up toward the northeast, I have permit data, and that's a raised permit, the big red circle. You might not be able to see it from your desk. I symbolized this for me working on it and not to show it to you, actually. But there's a big red circle, means that's a raised permit for that address. Inside of it is a little green circle, dot, for that address. It means there was a to-build permit issued. And I have none of that down there on that. So I don't know exactly what happened. The building permit data is not helping me out here. So I pull up this other map. I can't put this data, this is a comma data. Does anybody know what that is? I just discovered it, which makes me feel kind of stupid because I should have been using it for a long time. Don't tell the state historic preservation officer who's sitting in the back that I just discovered this data. It crashes my work map. I've already got so much stuff in my work map that I have a separate map for this. And they have actual year built here, 1928, which matches my data, which is nice. And then just below it, it says year remodeled, 2013. And that matches what we see on Google Street View. So I'm going to cite this and Google Street View and say that old building went away in 2013, and then that's about when the new building got built. And then I'm going to look at this one up here in the northeast corner. I have a 1901 date, I think. And actually, you can see there's two brown, those are dates, those are years in there. And to the left is the year built of the tax office, and to the right is my year built on it, which usually comes from the building permits database. And they usually match up pretty nicely. And you get to learn why there's anomalies and what I should worry about and what I shouldn't worry about when there is a difference. But that one says it was built, I think it says 1900 for the tax office. My building permit's from 1901. Their records going back that far aren't that good, so I'm not too worried about it. They can tell me whether it's old. They can't tell me how old, so I don't worry about a discrepancy like that. But I also see the reason I'm looking at it is because it has that red dot and green dot. So I look at what those are. Actually, that label is associated with the red raised dot, and it says, I could read it from here, can't I? It says 3-story with cellar, single-family dwelling. So I know that that's an old building footprint that's gone because the build permit information is over here on the left, and it says, see, I bring together all this stuff in my work map. So I can instantly see what's going on with all these buildings. It's a great way to survey. I can see a 2015 permit to build. So the DC issued building permits just hadn't caught up with that yet. So I have a look at it just for kicks on Google Street View, and sure enough, there's an old house that hasn't been too well cared for because there's a bunch of weed trees that are pretty old in the front yard. And I can see on the August 2014 shot here that it's for sale. So what happens to buildings in neighborhoods like this that are for sale? They mostly get knocked down. So what does this look like when I'm done? I've attributed the one at the top left as being 1903 with the source. I've flagged that this is something that just I use. You won't look at it when you see my map, but I've set the flag to 2, so when I go to the library and look at it, when I zoom out to 3 or 4,000, that really stands out, that blue outline, and I know that that's a building that I can do some research on when I'm at the library. I got rid of the old building footprint down in the southeast corner, and I put a new one in, and this is my attribute data you can see on the right. Down here, I've sourced it to the comma data. Computer-aided mass appraisal. It's apparently for municipalities, people who are taxing land. It's just a system for them that helps them do that. That's what CAMA stands for, and the DC's using that. And The building in the upper right, the northeast corner, I took away that building footprint. I set the raised flag equals 1, and I associated it with that raised permit. And I would like to draw that building. So I look at the 2015 ortho photo for the district, which of course I also have in this, in my work map here, and unfortunately I'm unable to draw the new footprint because work wasn't started yet. But I do know that the demo crew for that lot gets an A++. Boy, did they knock everything down in that. That is one way to get rid of English ivy, isn't it? All right. So this is the type of thing I do day to day. I work on the data because there's a lot of it. There's about 100, our target is about 130,000 buildings. I have almost all of it now. Unfortunately, too much of it has been taken post-1950 from tax data. And it's not bad, but it just gives you a year. And we want to go back into the building permits which weren't microfilmed and were previously off limits to us, but we have a new friendly DC archivist who's going to let me, at some point when the money's available, look at the building permits from 1950 on and start to collect developer name, architect, and things like that. That'll really make the data a lot richer than it is now. But we do have a date for almost every building. You can see date maps for other cities, and people say, you know, I mapped New York City in a weekend. It's taken me 15 years in Washington, D.C. But we have this rich data from this archive that other cities simply don't have. So it really is unique what we've put together here. We digitized the subdivisions of Washington, D.C. Now these are big, most of you know what this is, a big chunk of land that's undeveloped, and a developer or investor buys it, hires a draftsman and a surveyor, and draws building lots and streets and sells the lots. And we did that using the original documents from the Office of the Surveyor in Washington, D.C. This is the Burleith subdivision document. Hard to read. If you deal with historical documents, you know what this is all about. You got to read script handwriting from 100 and some years ago. But we used these documents to create 368 subdivisions in the District of Columbia. There's a lot more to be done. Most of them are pretty small. We really did get most of the big ones. And you're going to see that all. I'm going to switch now to our map. Let's see, I want to escape here. Come down here. So this is our online map. So we're online here with all my data in it. And I'm going to click on a building here, Columbia Heights somewhere. Let's see where we are. This is 3464 14th Street in Columbia Heights. So here you see a 2009 date, and I got this from DC tax assessment. So not the best, not the richest data. Let me zoom in and show you something that came from a building permit. Here's some Harry Wardman apartment houses up here. 1909. Source is DC Historical Building Permits data. Harry Wardman. His architect was Albert Beers. Estimated cost for these buildings, $125,000 for 3 buildings that are 40 by 130 feet, etc. Pretty much everything that I collected, all the information that I collected from the building permit is available in this pop-up. And you can pan and zoom all around the city. And let me see the layers that are in here. I'll show you. I put some the historic landmarks in here. This is straight from DC GIS. Let's see what pops up here. They are these little flags. They're a little hard to see. We might want to beef up that point symbology a little bit. So here's the Tivoli Theater. This is not rich in content here, but you can at least see which buildings are historically protected at this point. Let's go to this National Register data, because this is also a little bit flawed. I did not change these points. The National Register dropped points. I'm not quite sure how they did it, but it's not good. It's good-ish. But there's good content in here because they have photos, which I linked to in the pop-up. So, uh-oh. We don't like unknown assets. No. That's bad. Let's try another one. I hadn't had this trouble before. Here we go. This would be the Riggs Bank, now PNC, of course. I think, if that's the star I clicked on. The photos that come along with what's it called? It's either the application for the nomination form. Yes, thank you. So nice content here, and in fact, the nomination itself should pop up here. And this is for all of DC. Now, the problem is that those, what I've symbolized as yellow stars, are not all that well placed. So at some point, I'd like to go back and nudge those a little bit. So we have those in our map. We have neighborhoods, which is a little bit of a landmine. I'm going to zoom out here, and in fact, I'm going to take the buildings symbolized away. It's a little bit of a landmine with these neighborhoods. I'm not entirely sure my clients wants these in here. We're going to have to talk about that before we go public. People are just very particular about what they, where's the boundary between Columbia Heights and Parkview, and people have fistfights over such things. So we don't want to be the cause of any of that. But for searching purposes and whatnot, I think it's very helpful for people to have a layer like this. But what historians are going to like is these subdivisions, which has really good coverage in most parts of town. And so, for instance, I can click here and get a pop-up for this subdivision. Let's go to a bigger subdivision. Here's the Columbia Heights. This is Todd and Brown's. Here's Columbia Heights over here. So, and again, some pretty good attributes in the pop-up. Now, let's see, you can also change base maps over here. You can do some measurements of area or distances, and you can print. Elizabeth is going to talk about that because we took the out-of-the-box print function and we framed it nicely. We make it look nice the way the Historic Preservation Office has me make maps. So Elizabeth is going to talk about that. In the meantime, let me show you some search things you can do here. I'm going to search on architect, and we saw the name Beers pop up. He was, oops, I got to spell right. I got to get over my dyslexia here and spell Beers. I'm going to say Beers, comma A, just in case there was another Beers. Execute is the green button down here. And this might take a sec, but what's going to happen is pretty cool because all of Beers' buildings are going to pop up in blue on the map. It zooms out to the extent of Beers' buildings, and then you see his buildings in blue. Oops, that's the wrong one. I hit negative. I hit the minus, hit the plus is better. That zooms in. So, okay, Beers was the architect for all of these. So I knew that Wardman built all of these. You can see my cursor? Yes. All of these between 1907 and 1911, some 220 row houses. Beers was his architect for all those. Question?
Yeah, because those are on the map, does that mean they're extant?
They are extant. Thank you. Everything on this map is extant. Yeah, we certainly have the ability to map that which has come and gone, and I've done that. But the Historic Preservation Office's job is to protect what's here and not what's gone. That's a tough thing to protect. So just in order to understand the development of the city, there certainly is value in going back and doing some of that. But right now, it's all that can be done to find the money to pay me to do what they absolutely need me to do at this point. So that's kind of a fun thing that we have scoped out and talked about, but it ain't happening now. But yes, all extant, sir.
So can I search by date, all buildings before 1900?
We can do this right here. We can say, Yes, the short answer is yes. Oh, I took the search away. I didn't want to do that. And before I take any more other questions, I'm going to have Elizabeth talk about the challenge, because once you get into web apps here, and that's what this is a web app. I'm blanking on how to change my query. Oh, I want tasks. Tasks. And instead of architect, I want to go back here and get a year range, okay? So I can type in a year range, 19, here's a time that was really a lot going on, 1925 to say 1929 should bring up many, many thousands of buildings. I'm going to hit execute. But before I take any more other questions, I'm going to have Elizabeth talk about that challenge of taking this out of the box functionality. So for instance, what we do, she's working on the mapping end of it so that when you press print, you're going to get a nice looking map the way we want it to look. But so it is with the reporting functionality as well. What you get out of the box is not too good. You basically can get like a spreadsheet of the things, of the records. And what we want a nice reporting functionality here somehow with a variety of maps, and that's going to take some work. That thing is still going round and round. Actually, it's not going round and round, which is worse. That might qualify as tortuosity. I'm not sure. What do you think? When the thing, when your little circle just goes around and around, that's tortuosity right there. It's not even going in. That's hyper-tortuosity. Okay, we're doing something. Okay, 1925 to 1929. Now, what I might do next is then go to 1930 to 1935. Same amount of time, but I bet you see a lot less blue on the map because you got the crash and the ensuing depression. Although Washington is somewhat immune to these things, isn't it? I mean, we just tax everybody more when the economy's bad and things just keep humming along. But in any case, we can see right away here that a lot was built from 1925 to 1929. These were the good old days in that regard, that's for sure. Now, how about we hear from Elizabeth for a minute?
Took us to the beginning, but that's okay. So to create the this data viewer, we used Esri's web app builder, and that contains a whole bunch of widgets or tools for the user to interact with the map. This includes filtering, like we just saw. You can create charts. Today I'm going to talk about the print widget, which is used for the public to print out what they see on their screen. It exports it as a PDF, and then they can print it to paper. So this is the default print result. It automatically populates with the scale and the title and the legend. So it's pretty cool, but we wanted something more refined. And part of the web app builder's charm is that it's supposed to be easy, but in being easy, you lose some of your control over the customization. So here's an example of changing the font, where you can pick large or extra large, but you can't drop it between, a 12-point and 11-point font. So our goal was to use our existing map templates that have the logos. It has some caveat text with a legal disclaimer and a locator map. So in order to get this to work, we published our template as a print service using ArcGIS for server. So I published it, pushed the template up to our server, and then took the URL and replaced the default URL. So just went into the application, hit edit, there's a little button, just copy paste, and now it points to our map documents. And part of the great thing about this is that after I did this the first time, I registered the folder, so our server can see the templates in that folder on my desktop. And after that, any change you make to the map document is automatically seen by the data viewer. So I was actually able to tweak something at lunch, and it's already up there. So I'm going to hit escape again and bring us back to the web app. And zoom in a little, make it a little bit easier. Maybe. But see, we have the print functions over here, and I think it says, maybe it's not up. We had one up before, it might have gotten closed down. Oh, so this is what the new map looks like. So it includes the information we wanted. It also has the locator map. So only the information in the main data frame is replaced with the information on the web application. It still keeps the relationship between the two maps. So this is its own data frame. And the first time I brought this up, the little red locator rectangle was there, and it was moving around through space in an empty white square. So to remedy that, we had to point it to a service that was already published on ArcGIS Online. So we were able to take the DC GIS boundary layer, add that into the map document that existed, hit save, and now there's a reference for where you are in the city. So this is one of the ways we tweaked the out-of-the-box product to better meet the needs of the client and the viewing public.
Okay, so that's about it. Moving forward, we have a ton of work to do just making the data richer. We haven't really surveyed too closely the area east of the Anacostia just because we targeted that. We targeted the areas that were developed earlier first. And so now we're just now finishing the area on the west side of the Anacostia River. And most of that has been populated. So if you look at that, it's mostly completed. But just the fine things, like there may be some substantial buildings, like school buildings, that might not be populated with attribute data just yet. So that's coming up soon. Probably we need to use the city's new building footprints that were issued in 2015, a whole new set that'll probably have a lot less distortion in them, fit their lots a lot better, things like that. So there's no end of work to be done on this. And I'll take questions if we have time.
So we have time for questions.
Good. Yeah.
Is this data going to be available?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I should have said that already. You know, it's funny. One of the people at my company were saying, "Are you going to present at Mount Vernon? You going to present?" I said, "Well, no, because it doesn't look like we're that close to getting this publicly available, and I want it to be publicly available so I could tell people, just click here and see it." And then they said, "Yeah, well, we're going to make that happen." And then last week we just hit a snafu, and it just didn't happen. Basically, I'm going to blame the Office of Planning, the DC. We were going to host it. JMT was going to host it, and then the GIS guy at Office of Planning said, "Nah, you don't want that to happen." He told the Historic Preservation Office, and he's right. I mean, we didn't want our client to know this, but the Office of Planning told them the district should be hosting this because the district paid for it, and it's district data now. And so instead of going to a jmt.com website, you're going to go to a dc.gov website to see this. And it may happen as soon as the end of this week, if not, hopefully within days thereafter. And
The building footprints?
not just yet. That's another discussion for us to have as to when we want any of that to be available to people. You can download building footprints, just not the ones with historical attributes in them just yet. That is our historical geodatabase. And we just haven't talked about that. The first step is to let the public look at it building by building and be able to make maps such as you can with this, but not yet with exporting capabilities. That'll probably come soon, but I'm not sure. wasn't my place to even say that much. Any other questions? Sir?
Does your the building permit data, does it include those parts of Arlington and Alexandria that were retroceded?
No, because of course the retrocession happened in the 1840s, and so there would have been no jurisdiction on the on the Maryland side of the river for those retroceded areas. They would have been back as part of Virginia, and I don't know where those building permits would be. So this is really today's DC only. I wish. I'll gladly set onto that project as soon as somebody on this side of the river wants me to do it. But that's a long, it's a lot of work. Yes.
Is there a base map layer on this?
Well, there are multiple base maps available here. Some of them are DC specific. Some of them seem to have issues. I'm clicking. It's this 4 square thing. So here's the different options. And some of them are just for DC. We're popping in and out here because I clicked it too many times. There we go. I'm going to click it one more time. This is light gray canvas. I'm not even sure which one I'm using right now. One of the problems with some of these is some of these base maps seem to disappear when I zoom way in. But the answer is yes. Here we've got 7 different ones that you can use, including aerial imagery. So this apparently is light gray canvas. I'm going to zoom in and see what happens. We're running real slow right now. But did it already disappear, the light gray canvas? There's my subdivisions. Light gray canvas might have disappeared already. So you see you can't get in too close with them. I think we found that streets is the one that we like. Let's try aerial imagery. Any other questions while I fiddle with this?
Oh, hey, Brian, this is Kim
Hi,
Williams
Kim.
again. I just wanted to follow up with the access information to when the maps will be live and launched. So the Office of Planning will be hosting the maps, and you can get access through our website. But if you would like to know when they're live, you can email me, and as soon as it goes live, I will let you know. So you can email me at kim.williams@dc.gov, and I'll have your email address and can forward you the link to the maps from our website.
Kim has been my contact at HPO for a long time, so she really has guided me through this. And not being an architectural historian, it's been a process of constant communication with Kim. When I run into things, how do I handle these buildings that I see on this map, but I don't have any other information on them? How should I date them? How should I source them, etc.? Just whenever I run into things like that, it's a lot of communication with Kim, and she's been great to work with. But here's the aerial imagery, which it's fun to look at, and then you can turn the buildings on top of these. There's the buildings. So yeah, you can play with this for a long time, and look at whatever buildings you like. Any other questions?
Yeah. Do you track like fire damage through newspaper articles?
No. What I
Heads
have
up.
in here, but it's a good question. What I have in here is really just. It's usually just the initial birth of the building, which of course is best found through the building permit. Exceptions would include substantial changes to the building. So there are cases where a building it's not a new building, but it's substantially changed. If you look at it from the street, if it's substantially different, then I want that information to be the operative information for that building. The best case scenario is to keep all that stuff. And in fact, the data behind this is I do keep I'll keep the original birth record for the building, and then if I come across something like that, I'll make a note of that and keep that as a separate record associated with that building. And it would be the operative, it would be a rebuild at a time like that would be the operative record for that building if it's a substantially new building. But I have to pick one to show on this map right now. We don't have a real sophisticated record relationship in this map yet. We can do it, and we might do it at some point. There's trade-offs, but ultimately we'd like to be able to click on here and see multiple permit type pop-ups for the building. But right now, it's just what we consider the operative record for that building. Does that answer your question? All right. It was super common, for instance, in a neighborhood like Shaw, to find an earlier survey was done. A wood frame house from 1870 is what I see associated with that address from a survey that architectural historians did years ago. I don't have a building permit for it, and yet I'm looking on Google Street View and I'm seeing a building with a Romanesque brick and stone facade from 1890, which I'm not an architectural historian, but I've been doing my job for 15 years, so I know an 1890 Richardsonian Romanesque facade when I see one, and I know it ain't that's not a wood frame 1870 house. So sure enough, I go to the library, and I instantly find a repair permit from 1890 to build a whole new facade on that building. And that would be the building permit that you would see reflected here. You might also see a note that says, back behind this cool facade is an 1870 wood frame house. But if somebody had money in 1890, they didn't want to be seen in a wood frame house in a Tony downtown neighborhood. They wanted to have a nice, new, contemporary facade. Lots of cool stuff. We find moved buildings, and Kimberly loves the old what we call pre-subdivision houses. So I get all tingly when I find one for her. Ooh.
So has Google Street View essentially replaced the need for ground truthing, or are there areas that are gaps, or where the photographic conditions mean you have to do other kinds of research on what building is actually there?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question. Can you re-ask the first part of that?
You showed us a couple of neat examples of looking on Google Street View to see what building was actually there. When you're curious about a spot, trying to figure out a discrepancy or something, does Google Maps generally do the job, or are there gaps in it where you have to go look in other ways to find out?
Well, it only goes back to 2007, first of all. So yes, that's a pretty big gap prior to 2007. But yes, since that time, it's super helpful because it's been down most streets 2, 3, 4 times by now. The big avenues, it seems to go down every few months. So that's super helpful, and I have a good enough eye to at least know a 1960s building from a 1990s building from a 1930s building. So yeah, it's just tremendously helpful. But that only tells me what it tells me, and it's from 2007 on. And even then, I try to find tax records are pretty good from that time on too, as sources for the year built. DC has its building permits, and all building permits, I think, from 2012 on as a points layer, which is just super now. So from 2012 on, I'm pretty golden. But it's like from 1950 until Google Street View in 2007, it can be really tough, particularly for buildings, for a site that had a building of the same, an older building that went away and a new building with the same address came. That is super hard to to date that, because all the sources, I can't say when did that address first show up in the newspaper, for instance, because that address has been around a long time. So those are really my weakness, is a building that has come and gone, same address. And in my methodology, without a full set of building permits at my disposal for that time period, it's almost impossible for me to date such buildings.
So I should know this, so don't tell the SPO this. What were the earliest building permits?
The earliest permits, well, the archive starts in February of 1877. I'm able to date some buildings back to I think late 1871. Permits were issued and permits were reported in the daily newspapers. So they would say, Joe Blow has built 6 frames on the north side of East Street North between 6th and 7th. Not necessarily terribly helpful, and not too many of those am I able to relate to current buildings. Most of those buildings built in the 1870s have been torn down and rebuilt anyway. But in a lot of neighborhoods, they're still there. And what I did was I recorded all the building permits, and I went square by square over the whole city, and I associated the permits with buildings like puzzle pieces. And if I would end up with substantially all the buildings on that block, but I have 6 wood frames on the north side of East Street North between 6th and 7th, and I have that newspaper report, then I know exactly where those buildings are. I eyeball them, I see that they're from that time period from the newspaper, and then that's my source. So I can use building permits indirectly going back to as far as 1871. I don't think we know exactly when the first building permits were issued in the district. Am I wrong about that? Was there some question about it? But we don't have, they weren't archived before 1877. Does that answer your question? All right. Sir.
Does the web app work on mobile devices as well?
I haven't tried it. An earlier version definitely works nicely on my pocket device, and I imagine this one will too.
Even with all the customizations?
Like
the printing and...
Well, I can't tell you about the printing, but from your pocket device, I'm not sure why you'd care to print. I would think from your pocket device, you're going to mostly want to just touch on a building and get the pop-up, and that should be no problem at all. That's certainly our antecedent to this, our predecessor to this. It works very nicely on my phone. Sir?
You've drawn the data from different locales. When this goes online, will there be some explanatory text of what those databases were, how they were compiled, what their attributes and limitations are, so you can assess the validity of the data you're able to print? Absolutely. Everything is sourced, and I will offer some explanation on that. I'm going to spend a good chunk of my work week this week doing just that. And we're going to have a facility for some back and forth with you, the reader, because a lot of people, back in the day when I would give a history talk, a history of some neighborhood or another, you'd have to beat the bushes and pull teeth and pay people to show up. You might get a half dozen people with nothing better to do. Now, if I give a talk on history in Washington, D.C., I would have 3, 4, 5 times this room full of people. I swear to you, it's unbelievable to the people that want to know about their local history. And there'll be people outside that couldn't get in, and we have to schedule another one, and just as many people show up. Because everybody wants to know. So and half these people, they already know what I'm going to say, because they've done it's amazing what people know. So they know about their buildings, they know about their neighborhood. So we're going to have some back and forth with those folks, rather than me being the guy who gets it wrong. I'm going to ask them for their help in getting it right. And so hopefully we can get some input from them and vet it and put it into the map when it's appropriate. So there will be that. We definitely want to hear from people. And looking ahead, I think there might be some potential for collecting other
information from people regarding their buildings, you know, who live there or whatever, through an interactive online map like this. Anything else? Yeah.
Currently only searchable by a single attribute?
Oh, no, let's get that back up and see what the attributes are. And, you know, we're not limited in these attributes either. This was just like what I told my colleague Doug I said, well, let's do this, that, and the other. We added squares, square blocks. You can search by neighborhoods, I'm pretty sure. Did I click this or not? Is it just that slow right now? It's just slow. The neighborhood, okay, tasks. And we had looked by year, so I'm going to go back here. Year range, oh, year, 1 year, year range, architect, owner, which would be a developer, if it's a developer, square, and lot. But we can include any attributes in here, and we're going to put some more attributes in here for sure. Yes?
Are you going to have searches be multi-valued?
Yeah, in fact, some of them may be now. So here's a spatial filter. Only, oh, okay, you draw a shape on a map, meh. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. And I'm not sure about the out-of-the-box functionality on that either. We may have to, you know, write up some of that. So some of that's going to depend on exactly what our client wants to see and what the public might ask for. But yeah, there's no ends to what you can do here. It's just a matter of rolling up your sleeves and doing it. Any other questions? All right, thank you.